There will come a day when your silence cuts deeper than your voice ever could. A day when the room still carries your echo, but your feet never touch its floor again. Not because you vanished out of bitterness, but because presence is a privilege, and yours was wasted on those who only heard you when you screamed. You gave them time, eyes, breath, fire. You burned for them just to keep the room warm, but they never looked at the ashes. They looked past you, through you, over you, until the day they turned and found nothing left to look at. That's when the reckoning begins. When they reach for the absence and realize it's heavier than your presence ever was. Because absence is a mirror. And in that mirror, all their dismissals, deflections, and delusions reflect back without mercy. You see, people don't fear your silence until it becomes permanent. They don't hear your pain until you stop handing it to them with open palms. They prefer the version of you that explains, that pleads, that bends. Because as long as you're speaking, they can pretend they're listening. As long as you're trying, they can delude themselves into thinking they're worthy of your effort. But your absence, your cold, final, irreversible absence that speaks without stuttering, it cannot be misinterpreted. It doesn't ask for understanding. It demands reflection. It forces the mind to replay every ignored cry, every half-hearted apology, every moment they chose comfort over connection. They told themselves you'd never leave, that you'd always wait, that the leash of your loyalty was infinite. And now they stand at the edge of a cliff, calling your name into a void that never answers back. There's a strange violence in walking away quietly. No doors slammed, no revenge plotted. Just an exit so seamless it haunts. Because now, they must sit in the silence you left behind. And silence has no bias. It doesn't defend them. It doesn't explain your reasons away. It forces them to sit with their own choices, their own patterns, their own failures. And they will. Oh, they will. At first, they'll scoff, call you dramatic, say you're punishing them. But as time stretches and your presence remains a ghost, the story changes. Doubt creeps in. Memory rewrites itself. And eventually, the truth, your truth, crashes through the walls they built to ignore it. Your absence becomes the confession they were too proud to make. You gave them chapters, and they skimmed the pages. They only underlined the parts that benefited them, ignored the paragraphs soaked in your exhaustion. And still, you stayed. You tried to speak in softer tones. You tried to hold up signs with trembling hands. But humans have a gift for deafness when they are comfortable. They hear what flatters. They filter what confronts. Until you stop speaking. Until the music cuts. Then they panic. Then they remember every melody they once tuned out. You become the song they can't find again, the one they didn't know they loved until the radio went silent. And that silence, once they feel it, will claw through their sleep like regret with a scalpel. Absence is not revenge. It is revelation. It unmasks the reality that presence once covered in noise. When you're gone, the absence doesn't just linger, it accuses. It says, "This is what you ignored. This is who you underestimated. This is the space you were too blind to value." It becomes a courtroom, and they are both judge and defendant. The verdict? Guilt. Not always loud, not always admitted, but buried in their subconscious like a landmine. And one day, they'll trip over it in an unexpected moment. A smell, a voice, a memory. And suddenly, they'll be face to face with everything they chose not to see when they had the chance. That's how you haunt. Not with ghosts, but with the gravity of what you no longer offer. You taught them presence was not guaranteed. You reminded them that people can break without shattering, that someone can love without staying. And that lesson will never leave them, because now they know someone like you existed, someone with eyes that saw too much, with patience that stretched too far. And when you were gone, the world dimmed a little, not because you took the light, but because you stopped lighting fires for people who danced in their warmth and never asked if your hands were burning. Your exit wasn't petty, it was necessary, a boundary written not in anger, but in rebirth. And those who once dismissed your truth will spend the rest of their lives hearing it replay in the silence you left behind. What they don't realize is that absence is architecture. It builds things. It builds clarity, builds accountability, builds evolution. You didn't just leave them with silence. You left them with themselves. And that's a far harsher punishment than words could ever be. Because now, without your presence to fill the gaps, they have to listen to their own echoes. And echoes lie less than voices do. They repeat. They grow louder in stillness, until one day they drown out the justifications, until the only thing left is the realization. You were always telling the truth. They just weren't brave enough to hear it. And once that realization sets in, it never leaves. It stains. It clings. It becomes part of the story they tell about you, even if they never say it out loud. You didn't disappear to hurt them. You disappeared to find yourself, to preserve what was left after they drained you, to rebuild the temple they kept throwing stones at. You left because you finally realized that presence is sacred, that not everyone deserves a seat at your table just because they showed up. You stopped confusing proximity with connection. You stopped lowering your standards just to maintain history. And in doing so, you reintroduced yourself to someone you hadn't seen in years. Yourself. The version of you who isn't explained away, who doesn't need to be validated to exist, who doesn't compromise their worth just to keep peace with people who only show up when there's something to gain. Now, let the silence grow. Let the absence become a monument. Not one of mourning, but of memory. Let it stand tall as proof that you were here, that you gave, that you tried, and that when your hands were finally empty, you had the courage to close the door. Your legacy won't be in how long you stayed. It'll be in how powerfully you left, in how your absence became a storm that uprooted the lies, exposed the truth, and forced even the blind to blink. Your silence is the final word, the period at the end of a sentence they never deserved to write. And as the dust settles, one truth will echo louder than any apology they could ever muster. You were always right to leave. There will be days when your name feels heavier on their tongue than it ever did in your presence, not because of longing, but because of realization. Realization that the truth they so carefully tiptoed around now stands tall in the form of your silence. It looms. It lingers. It doesn't flinch when confronted. In your presence, they had the luxury of denial, of rolling their eyes, shrugging off your concern, mocking your clarity with condescension. But your absence offers no such comfort. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't soften. It sits like judgment, etched into every space you once filled. Every empty chair, every quiet message thread, every unanswered call becomes a monument to the things they didn't want to hear when they had the chance. And now, that chance is gone, stolen by time, cemented by your refusal to return. Memory is cruel when it turns against you. It doesn't need your permission to play back the truth in high definition. In your absence, the moments they laughed off suddenly seem sinister. The smirks they wore while you opened your chest now feel shameful. And slowly, the narrative shifts. Not all at once, but over nights when sleep is fragile and guilt is loud. That's when they start replaying the scenes, line by line, gesture by gesture. Your eyes, how tired they looked. Your voice, how it trembled even when you pretended to be fine. And in that newfound clarity, they see the unfiltered version of you, the one who was drowning while they asked you to smile wider. But by then, it's too late. You've rebuilt yourself in a place they no longer have access to. Your absence isn't an unanswered question. It's the answer they tried to avoid. Eventually, they'll try to rewrite history. Not out of malice, but out of desperation. Because facing the truth as it happened is too grotesque, too revealing. So they'll begin to soften the story. They'll say you drifted, that life got in the way. They'll pretend there wasn't a warning, that you left without reason. But you'll know better. You'll remember the exact moment your soul cracked for the last time. The exact word that tilted the scales. The final dismissal that sealed your silence. You won't need to defend it. You won't need to explain. Because the truth doesn't need a lawyer when it's already written in scars. Your absence was earned. And every attempt to water down that truth is proof that the full weight of it is too much for them to carry. Time will do what your words never could. It will hollow out the arrogance that made them ignore you. It will erode the comfort that once made them so casual with your presence. Over time, the space you left behind won't feel empty. It will feel instructive, like a lesson that keeps giving, like a voice they hear in quiet moments, reminding them of what they failed to appreciate. And maybe, just maybe, it'll change something. Maybe the next time someone stands in front of them with open hands and unspoken needs, they'll recognize the weight of that moment. Maybe they'll listen better, or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll bury the lesson like they buried the truth. But that's no longer your concern. You're not their teacher anymore. You're not their crutch. You're the fire that burned away.